25 years ago, I committed myself, about the age of, that makes me 55, I committed myself to learning as much about the general phenomena of the New England towns as I could. I've now lectured in about 300 of them, usually about their town history, as I am doing here. The process, that's how I learned about the town, is somebody asked me to speak in it. And in New Hampshire, I've lectured in about 170 of the 234.
My bad.
What?
I thought it was only 80. Sorry. My mistake.
Oh, bad.
My bad.
What's gone bad already? But that doesn't mean that I know an awful lot in particular about the details, about the family names, about the individuals in one of these towns. So what I concentrate on is trying to relate what local people already know, the things that are external to the town that make sense of what happened in this case, Unity. My own personal background is I was brought up in a very isolated town in northern Maine, a town called Millinocket, Maine. Anyone ever heard of that? M-I-L-L-I-N-O-C-K-E-T, ride for basketball. And I wrote about, for a strange set of circumstances, having mostly to do with the family. I ended up an academic. My doctoral dissertation was on New Hampshire during the American Revolution, in which I quickly became aware of how the Revolution made towns so important in New Hampshire, because New Hampshire went through the American Revolution with almost no state government. And they so enjoyed it. That when they wrote the Constitution, the state Constitution, they gave, initially they had no governor at all during most of the Revolutionary War. They gave one, when they got a governor, very, very few powers. And what has happened in New Hampshire is we developed a very entertaining system of government, and we let the legislators do whatever they wanted. And they passed all sorts of laws, 15 volumes of what we call the RSA, revised statutes annotated, but we don't give them any money to enforce them. And everyone's happy. People in Florida happy. It's a little tough on town officials because they've got to maneuver what they can get away with and what they cannot get away with. And if they're unclear, they hire lawyers. But they didn't have any lawyers back when we're talking about here. But also the Constitution of New Hampshire is geared in a way in which is always emphasized individual towns. You may probably not remember the most radical constitutional amendment we had recently was one in which they increased the number of towns that had representatives rather than grouping them together and therefore really disenfranchising small towns. I don't know whether Unity was who you were packaged with, but so New Hampshire is a very, I would argue, it's the most decentralized and therefore town-oriented state in certainly New England, and towns of the sort that you represent don't exist outside of New England. So, and I've given lots of lectures about town origins. If you just look at the map that says at the top, this one right here, the geography of town founding in New Hampshire. It looks complicated, but it's very simple. If there is, New Hampshire got created and long after the Pilgrims came, more than 50 years, around 1680, 1679. got created out of 4 towns in Massachusetts. Portsmouth, Hampton, Dover, and Exeter. That was the order. So it started as towns with no government at all. And there's been a resident. And a lot of people, anything on the map that has a horizontal line, which is all of these down here, like this, but not unity, you're right above the line. All those towns were originally granted by Massachusetts. And that'll become important in your story because it is a story which I think is accurate about there were different claimants to land. Kingston and Hempstead, one under New Hampshire, one under Massachusetts. Makes sense because Massachusetts had granted all of these towns here. If you go to the second map, all the ones in the Connecticut Valley area, they're all below unity. There's unity again right here. Anyone that's got an M in it was originally granted by Massachusetts. You see, so you look down, Charleston was, Langdon wasn't because it was split off later from Massachusetts. Ackworth was, Leominster was, Halstead was, Walpole, they're all granted by Massachusetts. Initially. But then, that'll be part of my story when I get through the introduction. Massachusetts blew. They kept their mouths shut. The more than 30 miles, 20 miles of New Hampshire would be part of Massachusetts, but they're Massachusetts. So and there was a boundary controversy, and it ended up these towns, including Unity, clearly part of New Hampshire. Now, you were chartered first in 1753. And then you get a new charter, the one which you properly are celebrating, the one for 64 for reasons I'll explain. And you can see in those squares on this map, whenever those, I didn't put down the date of the Massachusetts chartering, but I did put down the dates of the first charter by New Hampshire for all of them. That's a quick introduction to those handouts. My story is going to be, I always like to tell people how many parts to my talk. So if you get bored, you can count them off. I learned that trick when I went to some concert. I can't remember it. It was Haydn's Variations on the Theme by Brahms, or some called Sleeping before it began. And there were 26 of them. And I tried to count, and I got worried when I got to 27. But I think I miscounted because it stopped after 27. My talk's only got 5 parts and an epilogue. And the epilogue is in some ways part of the original story, but I'll save it till then. Part number 1 is that boundary controversy with Massachusetts that I described. Go to the geography of New Hampshire town boundary map. That's this one. The Charter of Massachusetts said that it began 3 miles north of the Merrimack River. Massachusetts and New Hampshire, when New Hampshire was formed, there was no clear boundary defined. What Massachusetts did is claim you stay on that same side of the Merrimack River until you get 3 miles north of Winnipesaukee. So that all of New Hampshire, as far as Massachusetts was concerned, was this little circle here. And that's why they granted all these towns over here to implement their claim that Massachusetts' northern boundary went at least as far as north of Lake Winnipesaukee. They granted a total of 11 or 12 townships, initially granted in the 1730s by by Massachusetts. Now, New Hampshire's claim was only to start at that 3 miles north of the Merrimack and go due west. That's what I meant by it. Massachusetts had just kept quiet. All those towns on the southern border towns would be part of Massachusetts. But Massachusetts basically, what Massachusetts did was Bible was the law, not the English government. And that made the folks in England not very happy about Massachusetts. So when they decided the boundary controversy to really zap Massachusetts, actually there was a fair amount of humor in the final report. So we're going to compromise. We're going to take Massachusetts' definition for the first 40 miles, which as you see from the map is down south to about Lawrence, and then we're going to take New Hampshire's definition and go due west. And now that boundary controversy was an important part of the story of what eventually created unity, because it left lots of claims from the Massachusetts residue, the land in the towns that had been initially settled when Massachusetts, before the boundary controversy was, the outcome then was one in which it left New Hampshire with a significant problem of adjudicating conflicting boundary controversies between people under what is now clearly belongs to New Hampshire, but originally people, in all honesty, purchased it under a Massachusetts claim. And unity's compromise between the Buckingham and the second one was very much a product of the habit in New Hampshire of working things out and creating unity among disorders. The final element of that has to do with the origins of our state capital, Concord. There was a knockdown drive-up between Massachusetts claimants from the town of Rumford and New Hampshire claimants under a grant from New Hampshire to the town of Bow. And a 30-year legal case in England, Rumford versus Bow. And the end result was the formation of a community which celebrated the compromise they called Concord, literally. That came 4 years, or 3 years, 67, after unity was granted. And if you really want to stretch things, you can say the formation of unity was a kind of a dry run for the formation of what is now, wasn't then, the capital of New Hampshire. And it had to do, basically, with learning how to get along, even though you might have some disagreements. I don't know if that's got to do with the school system here now. That's part one of the talk. I say it's 5 parts. I like to stop at the end of the second part of the talk, see if I get questions at that point. Because although you're younger than most of my audiences, people tend to forget what they thought they wanted to ask about a big chance in the middle of the talk. The second part of the talk